I now must face some scorn for believing that Milo was real, when in actuality he was a fraud, and I supported him. I question his integrity, but give him credit for having the conviction to actually run some experiments. He inspired me, and he inspired others to actually run some experiments too, rather than the alternative of doing nothing. One purpose of this video is to give the victims of his fraud a chance to salvage a majority of their experimental work. I invested my time trying to figure out how Milo's device might work, just as I did for Murray's generator. My goal was always to make this device rather than an all-magnet motor. I call it a field effect motor, acronym FEM. Magnet motors are cute, but they must have a serious speed limitation. The speed limitation in the videos was one of the reasons that I believed Milo was real. In the big picture, permanent magnets have power limitations. Big motors don't use permanent magnets. This concept could be perceived as a typical DC motor turned inside out. At the end of the video, some of you might see a correlation between this concept and Milo's side-by-side magnets. Milo inspired me to think, and for that I am thankful. There are two obstacles that must be overcome for this concept to evolve into a viable product. The way around the second obstacle was learned from my evaluation of Murray's generator. The first obstacle is even bigger, and Milo's inspiration showed me a way around it. This idea is in no way new. I presented it to a PhD mentor over 30 years ago. He explained how Lorenz's equation linked voltage and torque. His explanation seemed like circular logic to me. My probing questions led to a back EMF explanation that was difficult for the mentor to explain and even tougher for me to comprehend. He also had the second obstacle as his backup. I now think back EMF is like phlogiston and needs to be put in its proper place. The prior experiments presented in this venue are the source of my conviction of this opinion. Murray's secrets are revealed in an open viewing of the prior experiment. Here is a simpler experiment that says Lorenz's equation cannot be applied. These experiments can be easily replicated with stuff available from Home Depot. The field effect motor is based on producing force between a short pole and a long coil without producing voltage. Lorenz's equation, supported by back EMF, indicates that once the long coil affects the entire magnetic field, voltage and force will be zero. Zero voltage is uncontested. These experiments challenge zero force. This experiment with side-by-side magnets and the field contained within the bounds of the coil produces no voltage and no force. I won't waste time showing neither being generated. I will change the elements to produce some force. I will remove a magnet and put in a piece of steel. This is the third best way I have found to generate force. Very small voltages are only generated at the ends of the coil. The toroidal coil of a field effect motor has no ends. The first obstacle is asymmetry. I am using a tired C-size battery to power the coil. The battery drops to 0.3 volts when it is applied across this 0.1 ohm coil. That means we have 3 amps in the wire. I had to add some electrical tape to hold the magnet down. The steel insert severely reduces the hold-down force and increases the lateral force. Just like before, positive current causes the coil to move to the right, and negative current causes it to return. First, some positive current. Moves to the right. Negative current moves to the left. Positive current and negative. I have to put the spacer back in, otherwise the electrical tape stretches. Powering the coil shifts flux from one side of the magnet to the other, creating the asymmetry we're looking for. Should it be any surprise that lateral forces are smaller when gaps are larger? Not really. When I buy magnets, they are shipped with plastic spacers so they can be slid apart. The flux density in the 3 center spaces here can't vary by much, so the attraction force in all 3 is about the same. However, the lateral forces are at least double for the narrower gap in the center. That observation might just warrant "so what" or "whoop-de-doo" reactions if your life goals don't include perfecting a field effect motor. We achieved asymmetry by removing a magnet to make a larger gap. Let's try it again. The south poles have been removed, and now we have asymmetric forces when current is applied to the toroidal coil. Being toroidal, the coil has no ends and cannot generate any voltage. One might also say it generates no dreaded back EMF. I personally abhor the term. It reminds me of Abbott and Costello's "who's on first" routine. When something is unclear about motors, the phrase seems to pop up and everybody just nods their heads. The asymmetry illustrated here is the desired reaction. Lateral forces in the gaps will be inversely proportional to the gap size. This might explain why motor wires are always fully embedded in cores. Lateral forces in the larger gap, 20 to 30% of the lateral forces in the smaller gap, are a reasonable expectation. Milo's radial design had essentially parallel magnets just like this. He did not have the steel spacers behind them. Steel spacers and coils, rather than horseshoe magnets with no spacers, might spin. It wouldn't be a magnet motor. It might be something far better. I would gladly help anyone who has tried to replicate and has parts lying around. A ring of evenly spaced magnets on an 18-inch disc is a great place to start. What I find intriguing is that the second obstacle needs to be avoided, and the basic Milo concept accomplishes that. Any takers can just drop me a line. Here is the second obstacle. I call it the snake. Powering the coil can produce 2 reactions: the asymmetric linkage reactions that is desired, and this impotent linkage that does nothing. Every design will have a portion of asymmetry and a portion of snake. This rudimentary design would be over 90% snake. The snake is a much lower energy reaction, and that is the second obstacle. The lesson here should be that there are 2 obstacles or problems. I realize now that I have solved just one of the problems many times in the past. Milo set me on the right path with the idea that the horseshoe magnet, in conjunction with the parallel magnets, solves one of the problems, and the gradient spacing solves the other. Magnet motors may be impractical, but conservation of energy may just mean one or both of the problems are unresolved.